In this episode, as part of our course segment, we will be guiding you down the fastest dirt section of the Leadville Trail 100, and that is the descent off of Columbine. But before we get to speed, let's talk about how you are going to modulate your speed and stop when you need to. For me, I always have one finger resting on the crook of both my brake levers, and you better believe that with a braking situation this crucial, both of those levers are wearing the Shimano label.
Yeah, the Columbine descent is the last place you want to be questioning your brake performance. Scrubbing speed precisely and with confidence is what you need on this section of the course, and it's just what Shimano brakes are prepared to give you.
Yeah, I love my XTR brake. Seriously, if an evil genie appeared and told me I could have only one part of my bike be made by Shimano, the brakes would be it. They are no compromise, race ready, they feel good, they are light, and they do not give up on stopping power. They have obviously a big price tag, but for me, it is 100% worth it. If you want to get just as good a stopping power and you're not as bad of a weight weenie as I am, go to XT.
Yeah, Shimano brakes are more than just levers, though. It is a complete system. It starts with Shimano's servo wave technology that balances brake bite with consistent modulation. Basically, you can quickly engage those brakes without being chucked over the bars. Then there's something called Ice Tech. This feature is most notably found in Shimano rotors. The rotors are basically a sandwich of metals with stainless steel on the outer layers and aluminum in the middle. The sandwich allows heat to dissipate, which reduces brake fade.
Sandwiches. In a race, no one likes to slow down, but sometimes you have to. On Columbine, those times happen surprisingly often, and that is why we always leave this job to Shimano. To read more about Servo Wave and Ice Tech and see the entire Shimano brake lineup, go to bike.shimano.com. And as always, thank you, Shimano, for sponsoring this show.
3, 2, 1.
Leadville, the podcast for the 100-mile mountain bike race presented by Shimano. You can find them at bike.shimano.com. This is Season 5, Episode 13 of the show that breaks down, builds up, gets you ready, and freaks you out for the highest, hardest one-day mountain bike race in the country. I'm Michael Houghton, hottie to most.
And I am Fatty. We are halfway through our Leadville course, and the course is about to pay us back for all of the climbing we have done with a nice long downhill. There are some things to know about this descent, though, and we're going to walk, or in this case, actually, we're going to ride you through all of this.
And it's about time we check in with our coach, Cody Waite. Cody has some real Leadville style of riding planned for our upcoming training rides. You know, if there's one thing every bike racer loves, it's t-shirts. And I have a half dozen drawers to prove it. I've got one that's almost all Leadville-related shirts, a drawer full of them. But we love them, right? I mean, they're just another reminder of where we have been on the bike, and it's a way to remind our friends, too.
Yeah, our t-shirts more or less help us identify the tribe we belong to. For example, my current favorite t-shirt is my N+1 t-shirt from Thread and Spoke.
Yeah, N+1, the perfect number of bikes, where N is your current number of bikes. I haven't seen that shirt yet, though.
No, you will see it in Leadville this year when I wear it. There are hundreds of bike-related Thread and Spoke t-shirt designs available, and so I guess it's not too surprising you haven't seen this one yet, Hottie. I have actually killed hours just sort of browsing the designs at threadandspoke.com.
And it's pretty amazing how they work. You know, you pick your shirt color, size, pattern, and then they make the shirt for you. You're really just customizing the shirt for you right there on the fly.
Yeah, and there's so many cool designs. We recommend you go to their mountain bike collection, and I think you are going to like, a lot of what you see, but I really am liking right now the Biking Colorado design or the Bike Repeat design. Just 2 steps. It does seem appropriate for our listeners.
It's not just t-shirts either. They also do hats, posters, and hoodies.
Yep, and there is always something new. I mean, literally always something new. Be sure to check them out at threadandspoke.com.
Every part of this course kicks you in the teeth.
This is the course. We are taking you through what you need to do to have the very best possible day on the second Saturday in August, from the shotgun blast to the moment you roll up the red carpet and the 105 miles in between.
And before we get going on this section of the course, I want to point you to a video that was posted, that is, on the Facebook Leadville participants page. The video is from last year's race, and it is posted by Nick and his ride from the Blue Corral. I tried Nick's last name, Fatty, but I would just make a mess of it, I think. So let's just call him Nick. Good guy. Hopefully he listens. The video that is edited down to about an hour and a half, but it is a great way to put some visuals to what we are saying here on the pod. So thanks, Nick, for shooting the video, and thanks to Daniel Amador for posting it on the participants page.
Yeah, it is a good video, a great way to see what the race looks like from a racer's perspective. Now, last time on the course, we took you to the turnaround, and we're just going to leave you there. No, just kidding. We wouldn't do that. Today, we are actually taking you from mile 52, the turnaround, and we are going to take you a pretty fair distance down.
Right. But you've already done more than half the effort, actually. This race is a negative split race.
Yeah.
Meaning that the second half of the race should not be as hard or take as long as the first half.
Yeah, that should be encouraging to our listeners, because at the point you turn around, it is really easy to wonder to yourself, is this really just the halfway point? Because every time I think that, I'm exhausted and I feel like, oh no, I do not have it in me to do this effort again. But you don't have to. Think about the hard climbs of this race and which are behind you and which are in front of you, okay? St. Kevin's, check. You've done that. You don't have to climb that again. Hagerman's and plus Sugarloaf, we tie those together. Check. You are not going to have to climb those again. You are going to descend them. Columbine, guess what? Check. You just finished climbing that. So there are really two climbs left for you. There's Powerline, and that's a biggie, and there are May Queen. We are going to talk about both of those, so those don't have checks. But make no mistake, 3 of the big climbs in half the distance means that you are, if you play your cards right and still you've been eating and you've been drinking, you're going to be able to finish the second half of the race a little faster than you did the first.
Mm-hmm. We bring this up because it's easy to feel like, when you're at 12,400 feet, that this is all too much and that you don't want to do this anymore. That's just exhaustion and altitude talking. This is no place, though, for introspection or reprioritizing family over your selfish hobbies. It's time to execute. Specifically, do these 4 things as you start pointing your bike down Columbine and back towards the Twin Lakes Dam. First of all, you want to get down off the mountain. I mean, that's job 1, right? That's the big deal in front of you here. Get down in one piece. If you can, even though the speeds are high, we're going to keep pressing these 2 main points that we've talked about, I think, since we left the start line, and that is to drink and to keep eating, right? Because, again, you're not going to be breathing as hard. A lot of concentration required here, but there are going to be some opportunities as you're going down the mountain to take in calories and take in fluids. And the third thing to do, and if you're lucky enough to do this, and that is to cheer. I mean, as you go down, hopefully you're part of the group that has made the turnaround, and as you're going down, you're going to still see people coming up the mountain, up Columbine. So one of your jobs is to keep the love going. You got it going up, right, Fatty? And you want to give it back going down.
Yeah, it is. It's a virtuous feedback loop, and it can get you out of the little funk that you have. And I mean, all the things Hadi said are absolutely true. In addition to, getting down the mountain because you're in a race, you're also wanting to get down off the mountain because you're at 12,500 feet or 400 feet, whatever the altitude is. GPS is a lie. But you have 3,000 feet of descending you are going to be doing over the next 7 miles. Gravity, which has been your enemy for the last little while, is now suddenly, in a big way, your friend. But only to a point, right? The first mile of this descent is technical, capital T technical, for 2 reasons. There are a lot of loose rocks, and it is tempting to switch lines because of that. But you are on a 2-way Jeep double track trail, so you cannot switch lines. So, safety above speed. It is super common out there to see someone who has been racing with, promising day ahead of them and crash out there. Don't take the gamble that some people have taken and take themselves out and other people out. It won't buy you much time, and it could cost you, as well as other racers.
Yeah, this descent, actually, we mentioned the video from Nick, and he shows all of this descent, which is great. This top section we're talking about, this Jeep Trail section, which, as Fatty told you, is the sketchiest part of all of it, especially about a mile after the turnaround. I noticed at the top part there, Fatty, right after you make the turnaround, you start making the descent, it doesn't look as bad as I recall it from years past, back when we did the old turnaround. But about a mile after that turnaround, as you're going down, the trail does split, and you kind of remember this from going up. Going down, it splits obviously, so you'll be to the right here, and you're on this section, which I found to be, at least from the video standpoint, to be the roughest section so far. Like a lot of boulders, a lot of rocks. Now the good news here is you're in the split section, so even though Fatty told you hold your line in the Jeep Trail, this is a section where you can choose one side or the other of the trail when you're on the split section. So really pay attention to the rocks, the boulders, and the proper line as you head down the split section of the goat trail.
Yeah. And that split section, boy, I always breathe a sigh of relief there. Just not having someone to worry about who's going up when I'm going down is a relief. So once after that first mile and you split and you've got about 4/10 of a mile, then you are back together. And you are on sort of a wideish dirt road, very steep, with lots of loose rocks. So pick a good line, watch for outbound racers on foot who could be confused, or if they are riding, they could be, sort of pinballing a little bit off of those boulders and not be in 100% control of their line. So everyone should always take care of not encountering other riders. We don't want to overemphasize this to the point where it's starting to get freaky, but it is something to point out. You're going to be fine. Just take it easy, take it safe. Don't get a flat. Don't break your rim.
Right. I mean, look, folks who climb Everest will tell you this about descending too. Getting to the top of the Everest is great, right? And look, getting to the top of Columbine, you feel great. It's euphoric. You're glad you got up there, right? But Everest climbers will tell you it's the first few steps going down Everest that can be the most dangerous part of the climb. And that the analogy kind of works here with Columbine too. Like, you're going to feel great that you reached kind of the quote unquote halfway point, even though you're a little farther than that at this point. But you really want to watch it as you start coming off this climb here. Just, again, like Fatty said, watch your line, watch the traffic when there is two-way traffic. And when you get on the split portion of the trail, again, you're going to have a little bit more room to operate, but probably you're going to find a sloppier trail in that area too. Now, at mile 54, the road becomes wide and fast. Now you're headed back to that tree canopy section, and you got 5 really fast miles ahead of you. Remember, you got those hairpins down there. There's still reason to concentrate here, even though the trail has gotten wider and smoother. You've got some hairpins ahead of you, some brake bumps. That's kind of that washboardy stuff where other people have brakes, some erosion ruts to watch for. Quote unquote baby heads, as we sometimes like to call them, where you've got partially covered boulders that are on the Columbine ascent. Hopefully you took note of those on the way up. And of course, you're cheering the racers working their way up the mountain too. So even though it's wider and faster, and you're going to try and carry more speed and make more time here, there are a few little things to be aware of as you make your way down the tree line area.
But that 5 miles is going to go fast. There will be opportunities. You'll be able to see far enough ahead that you'll be able to go, you know what? I think I can grab the nozzle on my hydration pack and take a couple of good hard pulls at that. I think I have enough time to pull out a gel flask or a goo and suck half of that down and, get it back into my jersey pocket or, into the side panel of your DNA, your DNA bibs, plugging our sponsors there. But around mile 59, it's all going to be over because you're going to break out of the trees, you're going to take a right bend, and you are at the alternate feed zone. Just 46 miles to go.
Not bad. By the way, if you're coming off the Columbine descent, you're probably going to see water bottles all over the place. It's a good place for the high-speed guys. The bottles get jettisoned out of the cages. And if you lose a bottle, if you got another one in your cage, don't worry. You're going to be back at your feed zone fast enough. Don't try and stop and turn around. Just leave the thing out there. There's cleanup crews that'll come by and come get it for you. It's an accident. It's not like you purposely chucked your bottle, but you will see bottles on the descent. You just want to watch your wheels for those. Those can cause a real mess. So look out for those.
Yep. And don't chuck your gel packets out on the ground, right? Let's not leave a mess. So we're going to keep chipping away at the final 46 miles in the next installment of the course.
We love having Envy around as one of our sponsors, and it's nice to hear that many of our listeners have put Envy wheels on their Leadville mountain bike builds. The M5 is just an ideal wheel set for the LC100.
Yeah, but we get it, and so does Envy. The M5 is a high-end wheel set, and it has a high-end price tag to match. And that price tag is one of the reasons Envy came up with the AM30. It is a do-all wheel set that is still carbon, still tubeless, still made in the USA, but comes in at about $1,000 less.
Yeah, the AM30 is part of Envy's Foundation Series. In addition to the mountain wheel set, the Foundation Series also includes 2 road wheel sets with a much lower price point. The AM30 comes in 29 and 27.5 inch. They are built with Industry 9 hubs and a design change that I really appreciate, and that's external nipples so the wheels can be trued without pulling the rim tape.
And the rims are nice and wide, 30 millimeters internal, so you will want to run at least a 2.3-inch tire. That will do the trick at Leadville, I guarantee it. Is the AM30 the ideal cross-country wheel set? No. But it is going to be great for training and for everyday use, and frankly, for a lot of us, for racing. And our friend at Envy, Jake Pantone, said not to worry. They're going to be addressing the speeds and needs of Leadvillers in the Foundation Series at some point.
Yeah, you can learn more about all of Envy's wheels and components, many of which seem they're made with the Leadville 100 in mind, but which can handle pretty much anything you throw at them on any terrain at Envy. That's ENVE.com.
Hi, I'm Cody Waite with Weight Endurance. We're going to be demonstrating the aerobic strength intervals. 3, 2, 1, start. Crank it really hard for the first 5-10 seconds.
Cody Waite talking with us in Bozeman, Montana today. How are you doing, Cody?
I'm doing great, guys. Good to be here again with you.
It's good to have you here. Appreciate you joining us even from the road. So we are talking this time about low-intensity training. Honestly, that is hard for me to do. Why is that important?
Oh, man, there's so many major benefits that are derived from training slower, training that aerobic energy system or that oxidative energy system. And, you know, we won't belabor them too much in detail because there's probably been podcasts upon podcasts upon podcasts that have gone over a lot of the basic stuff, which is the basic benefits to the cardiovascular system. Things like mitochondria proliferation, capillary density, improved capillary density, a stronger heart, you know, a more powerful stroke volume, and all of these benefits, and there's more than that, you know, along with it, but all these benefits that come with training aerobically is to deliver more oxygen to your working muscles. And that's really what it comes down to. You know, when we're pedaling our bike, we are using a lot of muscles, most of which are in our legs, but they need a lot of oxygen to metabolize our fuels, fats and carbohydrates, to keep us going down the road with any kind of power.
This is what we call Zone 1 training, Cody, or is it creep into Zone 2? Where are we in our zones for the people that love zones?
That's a great question. So everyone, coaches have different, you know, zone nomenclature. I call aerobic training zones 2 and zones 3. I mean, to really be definitive, we're talking about pretty much all the training we do on our bike is in fact training our aerobic system, with maybe the one exception of, well, two exceptions, maybe strength training and, you know, like a pure sprint effort, you know, with lots of rest, but everything else is training our aerobic system. But our aerobic endurance system, or what we're going to talk about for the next few minutes here, is really focusing more on what I call zone 2 and 3, leaving zone 1 more for that super slow, like recovery, active recovery zone, is how I would refer to it. Now, there are coaches out there, not to make it too confusing, that, you know, maybe have a 3-zone model. And so zone 1 would in fact be the lower intensity aerobic training. But the zone model I use is maybe the more common cycling one. Zone 1 is your recovery, like really easy active recovery. Zone 2 is that aerobic endurance, that long ride pace, basically. Zone 3 is what I refer to as the aerobic threshold. It's somewhat synonymous with maybe tempo, and even touching on possibly like the sweet spot zone that's very popular these days. But in general, that zone 2 steady all day riding pace. And hopefully that makes sense, because Leadville, we're basically out there riding our bike all day, or most of the day at least. And so it's a super critical energy system to be training, and spending a lot of time in that, especially as we get closer and closer to race day.
And I'm kind of curious, with Leadville being air's a rare commodity there, right? You can actually buy oxygen in cans in stores. Does it matter more to train for train with low intensity for a Leadville race than for other races?
I don't know that I would say it matters more. I would say just endurance cycling, and really the word endurance is actually quite a wide range. I mean, I would consider anything over probably, I don't even know, maybe as short as 5 minutes, the start of endurance, and then obviously up to many, many hours. So all endurance cycling benefits from aerobic training. And I don't know if being at higher elevation where, because it's not necessarily my understanding is it's not necessarily a lack of oxygen, but it has to do with the pressure when we go to high elevation. And so the oxygen is still there, but it's maybe harder to get into our system at elevation. But regardless of that fact, training the aerobic system and improving one's oxygen delivery is crucial for any duration of cycling. Like I said, to start it off with, the primary benefits, of all these things is to deliver more oxygen to our working muscles. Well, those muscle cells use the oxygen to oxidize or metabolize fat for fuel. And what this does is it helps reduce the demand on your stored carbohydrates, known as glycogen. And therefore you can more or less extend the duration at which you can ride. And even more so on top of that, if you supplement with carbohydrates, meaning you're taking your energy drinks, your gels, those sorts of things while you're training and while you're racing, you can effectively kind of go on, we'll say more or less forever, until your muscles basically maybe give out eventually. But by utilizing more fat for fuel, I don't think glycogen sparing is quite the right term, but we're reducing that demand, the usage of our stored carbohydrates. Therefore, the more oxygen you can deliver and metabolize, the more fat you are able to function off of and to produce power and get you down the road. And preserving stored carbohydrates or preserving that glycogen is really the key to true endurance racing like Leadville. When we're talking about a 8, 10, 12 hour day, as soon as you run low on stored carbohydrates, that glycogen, the game's pretty much over. Like you have to slow down so much that, the game's over. So it's really about training the system, your body, to maximize power output while maintaining a relatively balanced fat to carbohydrate metabolic process.
A coach I had once who saved my 2013 Leadville, by the way, called it, "You want to become a better butter burner," which I thought was a terrific way to put it. Like, you want to burn fat. In fact, he and I did a little experiment once, Fatty, that we did kind of a challenge at a Grand Fondo, or it was actually a Century, a fairly flat Century. And I said, I'm going to go out and ride the whole Fondo and stay in my fat burning zone and see if I can do the whole ride without taking in food. I had a great pacer because I had Mrs. Hottie with me, who wasn't riding intensely at the time. So it was terrific. And we did. I mean, I basically rode on fat the whole day, which proves this can be a very, very powerful tool. If you can become a great fat burner, you can get yourself around some pretty heavy and hard events, provided you can stay in that zone and work that zone, and you have that zone, it's developed. You can become a great butter burner. Now, Cody, a lot of us call this type of training that we're kind of talking about here long, slow distance, LSD, not the drug, but the riding, long, slow distance. Mm-hmm. And that's the winter training as we're kind of, remember from the day, right? How does that differ from what we're entering now, if it does at all? Is it the same? Is it different?
It doesn't differ a whole lot, honestly. I mean, if it all boils down to it, we're training for Leadville, which, is like a 8, 10, 12-hour day. It's a long day, and we need to, train our systems to be able to utilize, close to equal parts fats and carbohydrates, supplement heavily during the race with carbohydrates. That will keep our glycogen stores, with the least amount of dent being taken out of them. So you have that energy to produce good power across the entire duration of the event. And, so the training is very similar. Long, steady distance in the classic sense, and the way I think of it is very much that winter, base training miles, right? And to me, that's like maybe the lower end of zone 2, where that's truly like slower riding. And the point behind that is very much the same of what we're trying to achieve here. When the typical, cycling training program will have that, those LSD, long steady distance miles in the beginning as base. And what that does is it creates this base of aerobic fitness that you can draw upon. And then when you start moving into higher intensity training the glycolytic systems, using more sugar to produce power, more carbohydrates to produce power, then you have that deeper base to draw upon, and you can do more intervals or more high intensity work. But when we're training for Leadville, it just boils down to that it's a long, steady day, and we need to be not digging heavily into our carbohydrate stores and getting more power produced with more fat contribution, basically. And we'll go through a lot of carbohydrates as we go. I think they say our bodies can store around 2,000 or maybe 2,500 calories of carbohydrates. Most of that glycogen's in our muscles, and then the other bits in our liver. And, that's not that much. I mean, that would be at like a full race pace effort. That's probably around 2 hours, give or take, 2.5 hours. Leadville's obviously quite a bit longer than that. So we need to be supplementing with carbohydrates, and we'll probably talk about that. I know you guys have had many podcasts about fueling. It's a hot topic, I think, for both of you. I know Fatty loves talking about fueling. So, and hopefully we'll get a chance to talk about my opinions on that. But, if you can put out good power while still getting maybe half, let's say, of that energy metabolism coming from fat, then you don't have to consume quite as many carbohydrates, and you're not going to dig as deep into your carbohydrate storage, the glycogen. Therefore, in theory, you can pedal harder for longer. And that's what we want to be able to do in a race like Leadville.
So give us the how and the when for this, because the way that we sort of started with the high intensity workouts a little earlier, moving into the lower intensity now, and the types of workouts that we're going to be doing.
So low intensity or even moderate intensity, depending on the athlete. I like to train by heart rate when we do this. When we spoke previously, last time I was on the show, about high intensity training, that is when we like to use power. We're doing shorter intervals. We're targeting specific, glycolytic like subsystems within the greater glycolytic system. High intensity, it's carbohydrate burning. We want to hit those power targets for those intervals, whether they be VO2s or anaerobic, or lactate threshold or anaerobic threshold, whatever those happen to be. But when we dial it back a bit and switch over to more of that aerobic training, I prefer to train by heart rate. Now, if you have power meter, I'd also like to observe power as we're riding, because there's a lot that can be taken from that. One, training by heart rate really lets you control the effort a little more, I guess, maybe fluidly compared to power. Anyone that's used a power meter before knows that the numbers kind of bounce around quite a bit. It's hard to keep it really steady. And we're talking about rides or potentially intervals that, are upwards of, hour or longer in terms of a long ride. So trying to focus on one narrow range of power, especially if you're going up and down hills, is not very conducive to making you a happy bike rider. So instead, train by heart rate. Find that The other thing too, sorry to get off track, but it's, if we're training our heart, our cardiovascular system, it makes sense to me to reference heart rate, to train the heart. So you're training the heart, let's use heart rate to govern that. But to keep an eye on the power, because the power within an aerobic interval, let's say, gives you a great indication, or across a long ride, of how well your aerobic endurance is going. And there's a term called decoupling, which is if you look at a graph, on a long ride, let's say you go do a 4-hour ride and it's fairly steady. Let's try to make it flat. So it gets a little trickier when you're going up and down hills, but you're doing this longer flat ride and you want to target this specific heart rate. Let's say it's 70% of your maximum heart rate. And you're able to keep it within a 5-beat window plus or minus of that pretty well across that ride. And keeping an eye on, how does your power change across that ride? In the first hour of the ride, it's usually not too difficult to keep power in, upwards where you kind of like to see it. Now, if you're not super fit by that 3rd, 4th, 5th hour, that power is likely dropping down. And that's called decoupling. So if you look at a graph, your heart rate might stay fairly steady, and then that power line will sort of slowly decouple or break away from being parallel with the heart rate line. So using heart rate and power together in that sense works exceptionally well for endurance training. And then also over many weeks of training, if you're doing a long ride or aerobic threshold intervals, which we'll talk about in a second, and you're doing them at, let's say, you're averaging 220 watts for your, X number minute ride. Over time, many weeks later, you're becoming more aerobically fit. You're going to train still at that same heart rate. That's maybe around 70% of your max heart rate, but you'll likely start to see your power going up. So maybe what was once 220 is now 230 or something like that. And that's a great indication that you're also becoming more aerobically fit and more prepared for an event like Leadville.
I was looking at your notes here. You have your cornerstone workouts, a zone 2 long ride. I want you to kind of tell us what that looks like, and then zone 3 aerobic threshold intervals. Explain what a session of those looks like.
Yeah. So my 2 favorite aerobic workouts, zone 2 long ride. That's that steady all day ride. That's really a cornerstone of probably just about any endurance training program. Definitely Leadville plans, it's usually that Saturday or Sunday long ride where maybe it starts moderate durations in the beginning of your build up. And then as you get closer and closer to your event, you were talking about those 5, 6, maybe 7, 8 hour, long rides in the mountains, if you have those available to you, to really build that endurance. And so zone 2 to me in my nomenclature is targeting about 65 to up to maybe about 75% of your max heart rate. So it's not terribly high. It's a lower heart rate. And the interesting thing here is when you're training with heart rate, trying to stay aerobic, the less fit a person is, the less aerobically fit a person is, the slower you're going to likely have to go to keep your heart rate under that 75% of maximum. And in many cases, you'll have to think about routes that you're choosing too. Like if you go find the big steep hill in your area, it may be, if you're not as aerobically fit, may be difficult to keep your heart rate down under 75% of max. But over time, that does change as you become more aerobically fit, just like your decoupling graph, like I spoke about moments ago, becomes, remains more parallel for longer. You will be able to climb those hills while staying aerobic. And this does take a while. I don't want to paint a picture that sounds like a couple of weeks and, the changes are made. This could be many months to even seasons of training. You'll get to where you can climb a fairly steep, long hill and stay under 75% of max in that zone 2 zone for aerobic training. So really that long ride, that's the classic one. Pretty straightforward. One of the little tricks I like to do, because those can be quote unquote boring sometimes because it is so slow for many riders, is throwing in like a sprint every 10 to 15 minutes within the ride. And that way you can hit some of those fast twitch muscle fibers, kind of breaks up the monotony a little bit as well. And just, so maybe you set a timer on your watch for every 10 minutes or 15 minutes within a 4 or 5 hour ride, let's say. And when that timer goes off, you can hit, a 10-second sprint with everything you got. I think that's a great strategy, just to kind of keep our fast twitch muscle fibers in the game too, as well. And then probably my all-time favorite workout, especially for Leadville preparation or any kind of long endurance, hard race like Leadville, is what we call our aerobic threshold training, AET, aerobic threshold. The aerobic threshold intervals or zone, let's say, is going to also be targeting heart rate. We're going to bump that range up from 75% to 80% of max heart rate. 80% is still not a super hard effort, kind of a tempo style of effort. And it also works where the more fit you are, the harder you're going to go. The less fit you are, the slower you're going to have to go, to keep your heart rate from exceeding the 80%. And I think this is a great training zone, but also such a great measuring tool that over time, much like with the zone 2 rides that are maybe many hours long and you kind of see your gains, here you can do 10, 20, 30-minute intervals and see where your power ends up, because you're always going to be targeting that narrow range of 75 to 80% of max heart rate, and see how your power steadily improves as you go. So, newer riders, less aerobically fit riders, if you're looking at your watts, you might be somewhere around, kind of depends, maybe closer to 80% of one's FTP. And then as you become more and more fit, more aerobically fit, you're going to get closer to 90% of your FTP. And that's when you start, playing around. You get pretty close to like that sweet spot zone that is pretty popular these days. But you have to be pretty aerobically fit to be able to pedal 90% of your FTP and still be at 80% of your max heart rate. So the two kind of play together. And some of the elite racers, they'll be pushing closer to 95% of their FTP, like really close to their FTP, and still at around 80% of their max heart rate. And, that's the Keegan Swensons or the guys and the girls that are out there, at the front of the race, battling for the podium for sure. But it's a great way to measure it, over time, do these intervals. So to go back to Hadi, your question, what are some workouts? A zone 2 workout might be a 5-hour ride, and it might work up to a 6-hour ride, or in some cases 7 or 8 hour ride as we get closer to towards the race. And maybe you break that, let's say 6-hour ride up, and you're going to warm up for a half an hour, just kind of getting out to where you're going to ride, and you're going to cool down for a half an hour. So that leaves maybe 5 hours in the middle. And maybe you do 50 minutes, 5 times, really concentrating on that upper end of your zone 2, which would be about close to 75% of your max heart rate. And then maybe every 10 minutes or 15 minutes, throw in that sprint, like I mentioned. The aerobic threshold intervals, what I like to do is start with intervals as short as 5 minutes and a really short, maybe 1 minute break, recovery in between, and do multiples of those. Maybe start with 8 times 5 minutes with a 1 minute break in between, 1 minute recovery, and target that 75 to 80% of max. And then over the course of many weeks, gradually extend that 5 minute interval to a 10-minute interval, to a 15-minute interval, to a 20-minute interval, and work your way all the way up. Potentially the longest I usually prescribe or even do myself is about 45 minutes, which is quite long. It becomes very demanding from a muscular standpoint as well to keep pedaling that hard. And maybe that first workout that was 8x5, that's about 40 minutes worth of work at that aerobic threshold. And then by the end, you might maybe work up to 4 times 30 minutes. And now you're talking about 2 hours within say a 4-hour ride, that you're getting this aerobic threshold energy system really established.
So when you're going that long, a 30-minute interval, how long of a break are you taking in between?
Probably 10 minutes. My favorite way to do this is we have a great hill in Colorado that is about 35 minutes long. We ride up it, and it's paved. I'm doing this on my mountain bike. And then there's actually a single track trail not too far off of it that you can ride back down to the start. And that takes about, at least 15 minutes, maybe 18 minutes or so to ride down this trail. So it's kind of a longish recovery, but it's great because you get to get your good quality work in on the pavement. It's very steady, and you can really focus on keeping your heart rate where you want it to be and see where your power is. And then you get to the top, you have a gel or eat a bar or whatever, and then you have fun coming down the single track and then repeat it again. But anywhere from 10 to 15 minutes, 10 to 20 minutes even is a good recovery in between like a 30-minute long aerobic threshold interval.
I hate to spoil the mountain bike fun here, but this type of work sounds like it's best done on a road bike, ? Am I right there? Or can you prescribe these on the trail?
I think it's best on pavement, dirt road, gravel road, trail. If the trails where you are steady enough to keep your heart rate in that kind of moderate zone, around 75-80% of max heart rate. There's some trails that are really difficult because there's so many turns or little ups and downs that may not be conducive to that sort of training. But if you're doing, you could do these on a climb like Columbine or something, a long, gravel road climb. You can do them on a fairly smooth, as consistent as a mountain bike trail can be, if you have that in your area. But oftentimes, road or dirt road, gravel is kind of optimal for these longer, steady efforts. How
should we be fueling these types of workouts? They're long, so something I would gather.
Absolutely, yeah. So they're long. So in theory, if we're doing our zone 2 rides, we're probably, and I'm just going to throw a rough number out there, you're probably metabolizing 60% of your energy from fat and maybe 40% of your energy from carbohydrates. So you definitely need to stay on top of supplementing with carbohydrates. I mean, my gold standard is trying to, especially as we get closer to the race, is start consuming the calories the grams of carbohydrates that you're planning to utilize on race day, because these are very much race-like intervals. We're going to spend, the average power across an event like Leadville is usually zone 2. It's usually around in that range. And heart rate wise, possibly 2. I don't know for a fact. I should have looked at that, but I know the power ends up being kind of like a high zone 2 in many cases. So this is the perfect workout to start practicing your fueling. Carbohydrates, I'm a fan of pushing upwards of, getting in 100 grams of carbohydrates per hour when you're training at these intensities. Because again, just like we talked about earlier in the race, we're trying to limit the dent being taken out of our glycogen stores. We want to do the same thing in training. So we're able to keep our power up when we're doing these, long, steady efforts. Because if you don't, and I know this from firsthand experience, if you don't fuel these workouts properly, you're going to see that decoupling, that power fade or drop will be significant if you do not fuel properly. And that will happen in the race as well. So there's a lot of similarities between this type of training and the type of effort you're going to be putting out on race day.
All right, Cody, I got to say, I am doing the workouts that you are describing, and I'm obviously putting some trust in you, because my inclination, my instinct is to get on my bike and always just run or ride as hard as I can for as long as I can until I fall over, and then get up and do it again. So it is interesting to apply some discipline, I guess I would say, to my riding. So I am looking forward to how that makes my Leadville, hopefully, my best Leadville ever. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, absolutely. A pleasure to be here.
When I look back at my Leadville training, there was a lot I got right, but a few things I got wrong. And one of those things was I rode just too damn much. And you're like, what? Too much? Yeah, there is such a thing, especially when you have other life duties. You can just overtrain, override, do too much.
I say there is no such thing as too much training. I love riding. I can never get enough. But I also know that I am wrong. So our takeaway here is that we're logging longer, more Leadville-like rides. And when we say Leadville-like, we don't mean in distance, we mean the effort you're going to be riding for most of the day.
Yeah, the Hottie plan, not in here this time, right? And that's a good thing. If you'd like to get some personalized training with Coach Cody, you can find him over at Weight Endurance. That's WAITEENDURANCE.com.
It's worth mentioning that Coach Cody segments in this show are brought to you by The Feed, which has a great program for our listeners. Cody talked about fueling this, all year long rides, and you can find the nutrition to do all of that at The Feed.
How would you like $80 to spend on any nutrition brand or product that fuels your training and racing? Right now, you can receive $80 in annual credit at The Feed.
Yeah, The Feed is the largest online marketplace for athletes to shop sports nutrition, high-performance supplements, and recovery gear that you need to make your workouts as best as they can be.
Claim your $80 annual credit at thefeed.com/Leadville. Register your email and verify your phone number, then spend your first Feed credit of $20 right away.
All right, let's go ahead and wrap this episode. Hottie and I are both on social media. I'm on Twitter at Fat Cyclist. Hottie's on Instagram at Michael Houghton. Of course, we are both on the Facebook Leadville 100 mountain bike page. And of course, if you want to have a conversation, go to our Slack channel. You will find a link to it over at leadville.fm/Slack.
If you like this show, go to wherever you listen and give us a 5-star rating and write a review. And to see all the ways you can find this show, it is leadville.fm.
Yes, please tell your friends. Use word of mouth. It will help us out. And this is an independent podcast, so we need your help. Please.
Good luck in your riding, racing, and recovery, and descending, by the way. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you at the starting line.
And as you rock it down Columbine.